Think of the last time life shook you. Not a small shake, the kind that went through everything, through your places, through your certainty, through your sense of who you were and what you could count on. Now think of someone you know who went through something similar and somehow came out the other side still standing, not untouched, but unbroken. What did they have that you are still looking for? You have been shaken, maybe recently, maybe years ago, in a way you are still recovering from. A loss that reorganized everything, a diagnosis that changed the timeline, a relationship that ended without a clear explanation. And what surprised you most was not the event itself, but your own reaction. How quickly the ground felt uncertain, how long it took, or is still taking, to find your footing again. Plus, nobody prepared you for how long the shaking can last. Here is what most people never discover. The goal is not to avoid being shaken. Life will shake you. That is not a problem with life. That is life. The goal is to have something inside you that the shaking cannot reach. Not a mystical state. A trainable skill, available at any age, starting exactly where you are right now. In a storm, the oak resists. It stands rigid and sometimes holds, and sometimes breaks. The bamboo bends almost to the ground, and when the storm passes, it returns to standing. Not because it is weaker, because it understood something the oak did not. The storm is temporary, and the roots are permanent. A still mind is a bamboo mind. And today we are going to learn how to grow one. But first, we need to understand why the mind becomes unsettled in the first place. Because most people are solving the wrong problem. That is exactly where we begin. 1. Why the mind gets shaken. You have been told that a calm mind is a controlled mind, that if you just think right and breathe right and react right, the shaking will stop. But what if trying to control is exactly what keeps the shaking going? We were taught that strength means not being moved, that a person who has it together does not fall apart. Do not cry in front of others. Do not let the uncertainty show. And so when life shook us, we did what we were taught to do. We gripped harder. We pushed the feeling down. We told ourselves to be stronger, to get over it faster, to stop letting it affect us so much. And the shaking continued. Not because we were weak, because we were fighting the wrong thing. Here's the paradox that changes everything. The harder you push against a feeling, the more space it takes up. Guys, try right now not to think about something that is worrying you. Notice what happens. The mind goes directly to it. Resistance is not a solution, it is an amplifier. The Buddha taught what he called the second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself, the loss, the illness, the disappointment, the thing that life did that you did not ask for and cannot undo. That arrow hurts. There is no way around it. But most people do not suffer primarily from the first arrow. They suffer from the second one, the one they fire at themselves afterward. Why is this happening to me? Why can't I just move on? What is wrong with me that I still feel this way? I should be stronger by now. That second arrow, the judgment, the resistance, the story added on top of the pain, that is where most suffering lives. And unlike the first arrow, Mita, the second one had always a choice. I think of a man I know who lost his wife after many years together. When she died, everyone around him said the same thing, be strong. And he tried. He controlled his face in public. He kept busy. He pushed through each day without allowing himself to feel what was underneath. And he told me later that those first months were the worst of his life, not because of the grief, because of the exhausting, relentless effort to not feel the grief. It was only when he finally stopped fighting it, when he sat down in the quiet of his house and let what was there actually be there, that something began very slowly to shift, not to disappear, to move. We have been taught the wrong definition of strength. We have confused strength with not feeling, with control, with the appearance of being unmoved. But the strongest people I have ever known were not the ones who felt the least. They were the ones who felt everything and were not destroyed by it. That is the difference between the rock and the bamboo. The rock feels nothing. It just sits there, hard and unchanged, until eventually something larger comes along and splits it. The bamboo feels every gust of wind. It bends with each one, and after every storm, it returns to exactly where it was standing before. Not despite the bending, because of it. The old sentence is, I need to control my reactions so I don't get shaken. The new sentence is, I don't need to control the shaking. I need to build something inside me that the shaking moves through without destroying. The bamboo does not spend its days bracing for the storm. It does not practice being rigid. It practices being rooted. And the deeper the roots, the more freely it can bend, because it knows that no matter how far the wind pushes it, the roots will bring it back. That is the practice, not building walls against what comes, building roots deep enough that what comes no longer threatens to sweep you away. Most people will spend their lives trying to control circumstances, trying to arrange things so they are never too uncomfortable, never too uncertain, never too exposed to what they cannot predict. They will spend enormous energy on this, and life will shake them anyway, because life always does, and they will never discover that the shaking was never the problem. The missing root system was. That root system is buildable. It is available to anyone, including you. Starting now, today. But notice the next moment that you feel the urge to control something you cannot actually control. Don't try to stop the urge. Just notice it. Name it quietly. This is me trying to be the oak. And in that noticing, in that honest moment of witnessing yourself without judgment, you have already planted the first root. So the problem is not the shaking. The problem is what we do in response. Gripping harder, resisting more, fighting what cannot be fought. But the monk does something different. He has spent years building something inside himself that the shaking moves through without destroying. That something has a name, and it can be built. That is exactly where we go next. 2. The 3 roots of a still mind. A still mind is not built in meditation. It is built in the ordinary moments between meditations, in the way you respond to small irritations, in the way you hold uncertainty, in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. The monk's stillness did not appear. It was built, slowly, quietly, one ordinary moment at a time. The first root, acceptance without agreement. Most people misunderstand this root. They hear acceptance and think surrender. Giving up, pretending the pain is not real, but that is not what it means. Acceptance means you stop spending your energy fighting the reality of this moment, not agreeing with it, not approving it, simply acknowledging that it is already here, already true. And that the energy used to argue with what is already true could go somewhere that might actually help. Buddhist teaching is precise about this. The source of suffering is not what happens to us. It is our resistance to what happens. When we say this should not be happening, we are not describing reality. We are creating a war with it, and reality always wins. I think of a woman who spent years fighting a diagnosis that would not change, no matter how much she fought it. She told me I wasted 5 years being angry, and in those 5 years, the illness stayed the same. But my life got smaller because everything was going into anger. The day she stopped, not surrendering, just ending the war with what was already true, she said it felt like putting down something very heavy she had been carrying without realizing. The illness did not disappear, but her life opened again. The second row, the present moment as anchor. Most of the shaking in the mind is not about what is happening right now. It is about what happened before or what might happen next. The mind is a time traveler, and in that constant movement between a past that cannot change and a future that does not yet exist, anxiety finds its home. Monks teach presence not because it sounds peaceful, but because they discovered something practical. Only this moment on is real. And at this moment, right now, most people are more okay than they realize. Not perfectly okay, but okay enough to breathe. And breathing is where everything else begins. I know a man who worries about nearly everything. One day, and he said to me, I realize that every single thing I worry about is either yesterday or tomorrow. Never know. And when I actually look at it right now, nothing is on fire in this exact second. The problems are real, but they are not all happening at once. That small recognition gave him enough space to take one step. And one step is all any moment has ever asked for. The third root, impermanence as comfort, not as threat. We have been taught to hear impermanence as loss. Everything changes. Everything ends. But monks discovered something the rest of us miss. Because everything is impermanent, nothing can destroy you permanently. This pain is real. And it is also not the final state of things. The darkness you are inside right now is not the last chapter. It not in the dismissive sense of it will pass, so don't worry. In the honest, observable sense, nothing stays exactly as it is. The storm is moving. It is always moving. Someone told me once, after a loss so heavy I still don't know how they were standing. The only thing that kept me going was remembering that this particular weight was not permanent. Not because I wanted the feeling to end, but because I knew I would not feel exactly this buried forever. That was enough to breathe through one more day. And one more day was enough. These three roots are not philosophy, they are skills. Practical, trainable, available to anyone willing to practice them in small moments before the large ones arrive. And that is the essential thing about roots. You do not grow them during the storm. You grow them in the quiet seasons. Oh, on ordinary days when nothing dramatic is happening, the work feels invisible. The bamboo grows its roots when the weather is unremarkable. By the time the storm arrives, the work is already done. You cannot grow roots during a hurricane. You grow them now on whatever ordinary day this is, so that when the next storm comes, and it will come, something is already deep in the ground holding you. Most people will wait until the crisis arrives to think about stillness. By then it is harder. The roots take longer. Don't wait. This ordinary day is practice. This small irritation is the training ground. This moment of uncertainty is where the first root goes in. This week, when something small goes differently than planned, pause before reacting. Ask, can I accept this as it is without agreeing that it should be this way? That pause, you practiced in small moments, where everything begins. The bamboo learns to bend in small winds long before it bends in large ones. So a still mind is built on three roots: acceptance without agreement, the present moment as anchor, and impermanence as comfort rather than threat. But knowing the roots and growing them are two very different things, because there is one specific obstacle that stops most people from ever going deeper. One thing that keeps the mind unsettled even after understanding everything I just shared. That is exactly where we go next. 3. The one thing that keeps the mind unsettled. You can understand acceptance. You can understand the present moment. You can understand impermanence. And still, at 2 in the morning, the mind will not be still. Because there is one thing underneath all of it that understanding alone cannot touch. And that thing is the one nobody wants to name. The thing that keeps the mind most unsettled is not the difficult circumstances, not the hard people, not the situations that did not go the way you hoped. It is the story you tell about all of those things. And that story is usually very old, written long ago, repeated so many times that you have stopped recognizing it as a story. It has become the air you think inside of, the lens you see everything through, and you do not notice the lens because you are always looking through it, never at it. My Zen teaching makes us a clear distinction between what actually happens and what we say to ourselves about what happens. Those are two entirely different things. The event is one thing, the interpretation is another. And almost all prolonged suffering comes not from the event, but from the story built around it. especially stories that contain the words, I always, or this never works for me, or I knew it would end this way, or I am just not someone who. I think of a woman I know whose grown children had been difficult with her for years. The relationship was strained in ways she could not fully explain and could not fully repair. And over time, without her realizing it, the story she told herself had quietly expanded far beyond those specific relationships. It had become, I am someone people leave, I am too much, or not enough. Or somehow always on the outside of the warmth that other people seem to find naturally. That story was not an accurate description of her life, but it was the story she woke up with every morning, and it colored everything. Every moment of genuine connection felt temporary. Every kindness felt like it was only a matter of time before it was withdrawn. The story had become more real to her than the actual evidence of her days. Buddhist teaching does not ask you to replace the old story with a better one. That is just trading one fiction for another. It asks you to see that the story is a story, not the truth, not a fact, a narrative that was constructed, that was useful once perhaps, and that can be examined. And in the moment you truly see it as a story rather than as reality, something shifts. A small space opens between you and it. And in that space, for the first time, you have a choice about how to respond rather than simply reacting as the story has always told you to. I believe the most important work available at this stage of life is exactly this. Not building new habits or learning new techniques, but sitting down honestly with the stories we have been telling about ourselves for decades and asking, is this still true? Not whether it was ever true, whether it is still true now, whether the person you have become through everything you have lived deserves a more accurate story than the one written during your hardest moments. The old sentence is, this is just who I am. This is how things always go for me. The new sentence is, that is a story I have been telling, and stories can be examined. And stories can change. The bamboo does not tell itself a story about the storm. It does not think, this always happens to me. It simply bends and then returns. The story is what adds weight to what is already heavy, and the first step toward a still mind is not silence. It is honesty about what we have been saying to ourselves for far too long. Tonight, take one belief you hold about yourself, something that begins with I always, or I never, or I can't. Write it down, then ask, is this actually true, or is this a story told so many times that I stopped questioning it? You do not have to answer tonight, just ask. The question itself begins to loosen what has been keeping the lake unsettled long after the wind stopped blowing. So underneath the shaking, underneath the reactions, underneath the old stories, something is waiting. But something that has always been there. A stillness that is not the absence of movement, but the presence of something that movement cannot disturb. That is what we have come to now. And it is closer than you think. Let's finish this together. Remember the bamboo we spoke about at the beginning? The one that bends in the storm and returns? You have just learned what makes its roots deep, acceptance without agreement. The present moment is an anchor, impermanence as comfort, not as threat, and the honesty to examine the stories that have kept you unsettled long after the storms that created them have passed. A still mind is not a mind that feels nothing. It is not a mind that is never shaken. It is a mind that has built, through honest practice in ordinary moments, something inside itself that the shaking moves through without destroying. The oak resists and sometimes breaks. The bamboo bends and always returns. You were never meant to be the oak. You were always capable of being the bamboo. The roots that make the bending possible are built not in the dramatic moments, but in the small ones. In irritation, you meet with curiosity instead of reaction. In the uncertainty, as you sit with it instead of immediately trying to fix it. In the story, you choose to question instead of simply repeating one more time. After everything I have observed about how people carry their years, how some move through difficulty with a lightness that others never find, I come back to this every time. The people who are not destroyed by life are not the ones who have had easier lives. They are the ones who built something inside themselves that difficulty cannot reach, not through great discipline, through small, consistent, honest practice, through choosing again and again in unremarkable moments to bend rather than break. Somewhere right now, a storm is moving through someone's life. And somewhere, someone who has tended their roots, it is bending in that storm, all the way to the ground perhaps, but not breaking. And when the wind passes, they will return to standing. Not because they were stronger than the storm, because they were more deeply rooted than the storm was wide. That is what is available to you. Not a life without storms, a self that knows how to bend. The roots are already there. They have always been there, waiting for you to tend to them. If something in this video settled something in you, please like it and share it with someone who is in a storm right now and needs to be reminded that bending is not the same as breaking. And leave one comment before you go. What is the storm you are learning to bend in rather than fight? I should read every single one, because you are not alone in the storm, and the roots you are building right now, even on the hardest days, are the ones that will hold you through everything still to come.